was 22 years old when I came to prison.
I was 30 years old when I went to prison.
I was at the age of 19. I had just turned 19.
Hi, I'm Chris, and I help life-sentenced men transition from institutionalized prison life back into society. Every one of our men has already served 25 to 45 years in prison. I serve on the board of the Corrections Transition Program at Everglades Correctional Institution in Miami, Florida. I teach these men life skills and how to speak, listen, and think, so when they get paroled, they become assets to their communities rather than liabilities of the state. Welcome to Men Going Home. I'm Chris Wolfe, and we've got another great show for you today because we are the only show that brings you access to a segment of society very few people know anything about. Men who have spent more than 30, 35, and even 40 years in prison. We'll talk to them about their crimes, their life in prison, and what their transition back into society was like after all those years. Now, we usually welcome my good friend and co-host Andy Corge at this point. However, Andy is traveling to Sedona, Arizona and Southern California this week, and I believe we have a few pics of him that we can bring up on the screen. He's out there with his lovely wife, Rebecca, and we all look forward to Andy's return on June 1st. Now, last week's show with William Steele was a fascinating show about a hard-working family man with a wife and 3 young daughters, and the horrible effects of drug abuse. Once William started using crack cocaine, the drug took total control of his life. He eventually shot and killed his crack dealer over just $90. He received a life sentence and spent 30 years in prison. To see that episode with William Steele and many more compelling stories, please go to The Man Live on YouTube and Facebook and click on Men Going Home. And please don't forget to like and subscribe on The Man Live. Let's introduce today's special guest. Today's special guest was convicted of first-degree murder in 1977, and he has spent 25 years in Florida's most violent prisons. However, Richard never actually killed anyone. He was simply there and found guilty because of several very unfortunate circumstances. However, he is here today to tell his true story. Please welcome Richard Jackson. Welcome to the show, Richard.
Thank you.
So, Richard, tell us, you were actually born and raised on the south side of Chicago, correct?
That's correct.
So what was that like? You were born back in 1944, south side of Chicago. What was that like growing up in Chicago?
It was just neighborhoods. They were safe. Everybody, there were very few people moving and coming and going. We got to know everybody. We entertained ourselves and played and had to be careful to do the right thing because all the neighbors knew our parents, and by the time we got home, they had known if we had done something wrong. So
You described it as the Leave It to Beaver neighborhood. Now, a lot of people watching this show don't know Leave It to Beaver, but it was an iconic show back in the 60s where, housewives wore dresses when they cleaned the houses and everything was good. And it was that type of a neighborhood?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so different than back then. The women in the neighborhood did not work. They stayed at home and took care of the house and the children, and the men went to work. And
you attended public school?
I attended private Catholic schools.
All through?
All the way through, yes.
Oh, all through. Okay. And were you a good student?
Average. Yeah, average.
Did you like school?
I guess I did. Yeah, I liked being around people and playing and getting to know people.
You have brothers and sisters?
I have an older brother and a younger sister.
Are you still close with them?
Oh, absolutely.
And tell us about your parents growing up.
I'd say we were just middle-class people. My dad worked hard. He was in the transportation business. Always made a good living and took care of his family.
So he was in the trucking industry, correct?
Trucking industry, correct.
And your mother was a homemaker?
Absolutely.
Like June Cleaver?
June Cleaver.
All right. So now, you were in the south side of Chicago through age 13?
Yes.
And then what happened?
We moved to Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
Why?
My dad went to work for a trucking company called Hennis Freight Lines. And we just moved down there to a place right outside of Winston-Salem called Lake Hills. It was a private community. And we had horses and swimming and tennis, and it was an ideal.
How long did you live there?
We lived there for about 3.5 years and then moved back to Chicago.
And why did you move back?
My mother could not stand North Carolina.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
The boss says we got to move.
Well, she's a Chicago girl. Everything was close by there. It was 25 minutes to the stores and by herself a lot. Neighborhoods. It was like maybe 300 yards to the next home where we lived, and she just didn't like that seclusion.
So you moved back to Chicago, and you graduate from, was it public school at that point?
At that time, I was going to public school, yes. Carl Sandburg High School.
Carl Sandburg High School. So now what's interesting is after high school, you decided not to go to college. You went into the military. Tell us about how that decision was made.
I really don't know why. I just felt that I needed to get out and experience things and just get out on my own a little bit maybe. And so I enlisted in the Army. So.
Well, here was the thing. Didn't you had a family member that was in the military, correct? And he became a major?
Yes.
And you liked that lifestyle?
I had a cousin on my dad's side of the family that enlisted. He was an enlisted man. Then he went to OCS and he became a major. He retired lieutenant colonel. And
so that lifestyle seemed kind of attractive to you.
It did. He traveled a lot. I always admired him.
All right.
Great
he's
stories.
a major, but you enter as a
enlisted
buck
man.
private.
Yep.
And you end up at Fort Knox, Kentucky, correct?
Correct.
Basic training?
Yes.
What was that like?
Quite a change. Up and down hills and marching and routine, from the time you woke to the time you went to bed.
Now, but what's interesting is that you went through this extreme vetting process. You go to basic training with 1,500, 2,000 other cadets or young soldiers, and you go through this testing vetting process. They whittle it down to about 12 or 13 of you.
Yeah, we went.
And they offer you basically officer training.
That's correct. OCS.
But you turned that down.
Yeah, and that's sort of something that maybe people wouldn't figure out. But we got into this church, and we had all these airborne people coming and speaking to us and telling us all about this and that. And everybody that was there besides me went forward to join, And I just sat back. Finally, one of the airborne guys came down and asked me, what's the problem? I said, there's just something not right about
you
this.
said there was something that just didn't feel right. Do you remember what you thought that was at the time, or you couldn't put your finger on it?
I can't say. Sometimes something just doesn't resonate with you. It just doesn't sound kosher, if you might say. And so I left. I walked out of there by myself and walked back to.
And you went into the regular infantry for finished your 3 years in the Army.
That's correct.
And then you were discharged, honorable discharge.
Yes.
In 1965.
That's correct.
But what's interesting is that years later you found out something interesting about that officer training class, having to do with maybe the first people who went to Vietnam.
Yes, they. Those that went into the OCS and were commissioned, they were trained as platoon leaders, and they were sent into Vietnam to be leaders over there. But unfortunately, almost 100% of the men, at that time I think they said like 92% of the men that went in there died because they were fighting a war they didn't understand. They were fighting an enemy they couldn't comprehend. And I think that was a big change in my life because that evidently was what was just not resonating.
Well, you
with
had
me.
a very good sixth sense because at that time you had President John F. Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, and that's the early stages of the war where our involvement was escalating, but people didn't know.
That's right. Yeah.
So you honorable discharge from the military. You're only 21 years old, 1965. You head back to Chicago, and you're working with your father.
Yeah, I went to work for my father in the transportation business, the trucking business.
And what were you doing?
I was working on the docks as a stevedore. And
And what is a stevedore?
loading and unloading trucks.
And how long did you do that?
I just did that for 1 year, and I realized this is not for me. This is not going to be my future in life.
And then you went to the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company. You became an insurance broker for a number of years.
Yes, I did.
What was that about?
Well, Metropolitan was starting a new program called an MIC, Metropolitan Insurance Consultant. We weren't selling individual policies, but more for business, for organizations, and selling group insurance. And so that was good. It gave me a feeling of sense of actually maybe accomplishing something and doing something that might have in some way been important in the future. It was a very good experience.
So now, about this time, but you stayed at Metropolitan 3 years, correct?
Yes.
But you left. Why?
We moved to Florida.
But wait, before you moved to Florida, you got married.
Yes, I did.
All right, tell me about this. You got married to Judy?
That's correct.
How did you meet her?
Well, I was stationed in Milwaukee. I was stationed with an organization called a RADCOM, Army Air Defense Command, and we had missile sites around Illinois and Wisconsin, and that was our defense system at the time, Nike Hercules missiles. And I met her in Milwaukee. That's where she lived. She was going to nursing school.
So you got married in 1966?
I did.
2 children?
Had 2 sons, yes.
All right. So now, 1967, your parents moved to Winter Haven, Florida.
That's correct.
What, they just retired?
My dad he just retired. He was only, I think, 56, and he just thought I've had enough of this type of transportation and traveling and doing all the things, and he just retired, and they moved to Winter Haven, Florida.
So 1968, you had enough of, I guess, the North, the cold, selling insurance, and you moved your family to Winter Haven. Why did you decide to make that move?
We used to go to Florida every winter. Even growing up, we'd all go to Florida every winter and spend time down there. So we liked Florida. Mm-hmm. And we flew down. My parents moved there, and we flew down the following Christmas. And I thought, this is really where I belong. It was warm. It was nice. The snow wasn't there and freezing temperatures. And so that's really, we decided we're moving to Florida. We did.
And you're only 24 years old.
Yes.
You're married. You have 2 children. Mm-hmm. And you get a job at Eckerd Drug.
Yes, sir.
What was that like?
It was fantastic. At that time, I think when I went with them, they just opened store 81 in Haines City. And I started out working in the tackle department up front, which is your first job when you go to work for them. And then I was promoted to drug clerk and then to assistant manager. And then I became a store manager. And
for those of us who have lived in Florida for many years, I've been here 38 years now. Yeah, there was no Walgreens or CVS in Florida. It was Eckerd Drug.
And Eckert's was it. Everybody went to Eckert's.
And then you said they had 81 stores when you were there, but then they went to about 1,800, correct?
Yeah. Oh, we grew fantastically. I mean, we just exploded all through the South and the West. And
so you became an area supervisor with Eckerd. You're young, and then about 1975, you said you had a little bit of a midlife crisis because Eckert's was changing drastically. Talk about that.
Well, Jack Eckerd retired, and it went from being an organization to where people were important and people were valued. It became more about profits. And we lost that feel of caring for people and caring for our customers, and it just changed drastically. And in that period of time, say 2-3 years, so many store managers left.
Or were let go?
Both. They couldn't fit in with the new way of doing things and didn't like the new way.
And you started to become very vocal.
Yeah, I couldn't keep my mouth shut at times.
I mean, what were you saying?
Just what we had. One time we had some of our buyers come to our store in Winter Haven, Florida, and I was there. And it was Christmas time, and I had one of our employees dressed up as a Santa Claus, giving candy out to the kids and everything. And the buyers come in, and they said, what's that all about? I said, well, it's Christmas. Well, you have a Santa Claus? Yeah, it's Christmas time. That's what we're supposed to be doing. We want people to come in, kids to come in. We're taking pictures up front. Right. And they basically just sort of chasing me, that, well, who's paying for the candy and who's this and who's that?
They started, watching every penny. It became a big corporation.
Yeah, and I said, I'm paying for the candy,
Right.
So I guess I sort of told them they need to get their
Right.
head out of their butt and realize what's going on. And after that, I sort of fell out of favor, and within probably a year, I was gone.
So about 1975, 1976, you're 31, 32. This was about the time you left Eckerd. Now,
Yes, sir.
were you let go or did you leave?
I was let go. Actually.
You were let go.
And that's up for some. But yeah, they basically.
Why?
let
What
me
did they
go.
say to you?
Just a lot of pressure on me. Just a lot of pressure, and but yeah, basically I was let go. It was time to go.
And you were drinking heavily at this point.
Yeah, I think that's when I really began to drink a lot more than I had been, and I had drank quite a bit ever since I was in the military.
Was your father a heavy drinker?
No, not at all.
No?
Nope, not at all. My
You were
mother
drinking
didn't
every
drink.
night at this point?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah,
You think you felt inebriated every night?
yeah, I would say so.
What were you
Yeah.
drinking?
Usually vodka or gin, scotch once in a while. You know,
Were you drinking at home? Were you going to lounges?
both.
And your sons were 8 and 9 at this time?
Yes, sir.
And how were they doing in life?
They were doing fine. We spent a lot of time with them. We water skied, and they played baseball and football. And
When we spoke, you said about this time, you're 31, 32, you said you felt like you were out of control. How were you out of control?
I think just the drinking, it just takes over your life. You know, I'd get up in the morning and feel terrible and say, I'm not doing this again. I would feel miserable, and by 4 o'clock, I was somewhere for happy hour. My life was just out of control.
And I think you said your wife was very supportive, and she would say, look, instead of going to lounges every night, why don't you build a bar at home?
Yeah.
So you did.
So I did.
And what happened? You just drank the same amount, but you're drinking at home.
Just drinking at home. Kept me off the roads, I guess, you know, but it didn't change my lifestyle at all.
Did you ever think about why you were drinking so much? Were you unhappy? You must have been. Usually when we do things, we're filling a void. Were you filling a void? Why were you drinking so much?
Yeah. You know, Chris, I really don't know. And I've spent a lot of years trying to go back and figure that out. I came from a good family. I had a good wife. I had 2 children. But the alcohol just had a control of my life.
Do you think you were a functioning alcoholic?
Oh, I think so. Absolutely.
Did you ever go to AA in your life?
No. Actually, I came home one night. My wife had gone to some place and picked up an AA brochure and put it on my nightstand.
There you go, a little foreshadowing, right?
And I got upset, and I told her, I am not an alcoholic. I don't need AA. That's for losers and drunks. And I was drunk at the time.
Right.
So,
And you said you were drinking heavily, and then you said, now here you are. I mean, I just see this story forming as, where this iconic neighborhood in South Side of Chicago, alcohol taking over, unhappiness at the job. Now you say you're starting to make poor decisions and you're drinking heavy.
Yep.
And what were the poor decisions you were making?
Oh, I was being arrested for DUI.
How many times?
Probably 4 or 5 times.
Wow, that's usually a telltale sign. I mean,
That should be a wake-up call, shouldn't it?
4 or 5 times DUI.
But back then,
But you never went to jail back then.
No, because you didn't. You just paid a fine back then. They'd arrest you, take you to jail. You'd be released 2-3 hours and pay a $100 fine or whatever it was.
Different. It was a different time.
Yeah, there wasn't any like if you get. Like now you get arrested or drunk, and now you may go to prison 5-10 years,
But you also got into weapons possession. You became fascinated with weapons. What was that about?
Well, when we moved to North Carolina, my dad bought me a Texas quarter horse, and I would ride up in the mountains. And of course, I began carrying a pistol because you go up there, and I carried a 30-30 carbine with me, and just weapons just sort of began part of my life. I would buy weapons, and back when I was in Florida, I would never leave the house. I always carried in my right hand back pocket.
But were you collecting weapons, or were you shooting them for sport?
No, I wasn't a collector. I was just shooting them.
You were shooting them.
I enjoyed taking them out.
And here's a quote from you. Being infatuated with alcohol and firearms is not a good combination.
No, it's not.
Talk about that.
Well, you just make poor decisions, and your life gets out of control, and the reasoning is gone.
Right.
You just can't reason anymore and make good decisions.
You started carrying a 38 caliber double barrel Derringer every day.
I wouldn't leave home without it.
But why? Did you feel threatened?
No.
It just gave you a feeling of security?
It was just part of, like, you get up in the morning, you put your car keys in your pocket. I put the Derringer. I never fired it other than just out in the yard. I never shot at anybody. It's a mental health situation. It's a very serious mental health situation.
And you're drinking too much, and as you said, you're hanging around a bad element. Who were these people you were hanging around?
Well, I went from hanging around business people with Eckerts to going to marinas. I had a ski boat in the chain of lakes right in Winter Haven. I would go to the marinas, and I would hang out with people that had been there all day long drinking or retired, or they might work a few hours a day or had some kind of little business. And I went from hanging out with people that wanted to support their family and do the right thing from people that just drank all day long and wanted to party and didn't have structure in their life, didn't have purpose in their life.
Now, there's one gentleman in particular. Maybe I probably shouldn't refer to him as a gentleman. His name was John, and he became a friend of yours.
Yes.
How did you meet John?
He worked at one of the marinas that I would go to in my boat, and they served beer and shrimp and all that kind of stuff. But he worked there, and prepared food, and tended bar and all that.
And he was just basically a guy that you became friendly with, a little bit of a drinking buddy.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
And you didn't know him to be violent?
Never saw him be violent at all. Never saw him be angry, lose his temper.
Did you know that he was interested in weapons like you were?
No.
No? You had no idea?
No, and I don't think he was. I really don't think that he was. I mean, we never went shooting together. We never, did anything like that together.
Now, in your words, I write down everything you say when we talk. And you said, now darkness sets in, February 4th of 1977.
Yep.
And when you walked in today, I said, do you know what day that was? And you thought it was a Tuesday, and Google says it's a Wednesday, but it was in the middle of the week, and you were out.
Yep.
The point was, it was the middle of the week, and you were out at a lounge.
Yeah.
You had dinner at home with your wife.
Yes.
And then you were going to meet your friend John.
Yes.
At the Marina bar.
Yes.
But your wife surprised you and said, hey, I'd like to go with you, honey. And you went, great. So the three of you go to the Marina bar.
Yes.
You have a few drinks. And then you decide to say, hey, let's go to the Elbow Room.
Yes.
In Winter Haven.
Yes, sir.
What happens?
Well, I went, and John and my wife, we went to the Elbow Room. It was raining. They had a cover up front where you could get out of the car. I pulled up, let them out. They went into the lounge, and I parked my car. By the time I got back to inside, which is just a couple of minutes, by the time I got there, my wife was just sort of acting differently.
Yeah, you knew something was wrong.
Yeah, when you've been married a long time, you know something's not right. So I asked her what was wrong, and she said nothing. But as it turned out, when she walked in, somebody had made a remark to her that upset her. And
right, she was there. She was in the foyer waiting for you,
Yes,
and
sir.
some man
Yes, sir.
said something to her.
Yes, sir, that's correct. And I'm not going to go into his name or anything
No.
because he's got a family and grandchildren. We're not going
Okay.
to discuss any of that. But anyways, my wife went. We sat down at a booth, and I asked her, I said, what's going on? And she said, no, everything's okay. Everything's all right. She didn't want to get me upset. Later in the evening, a guy came up to me and told me what had happened.
Was it John, wasn't it?
It was John, yeah.
Yeah, because you dropped her and John off.
Right.
You're parking the car, you come in,
Yep.
and John tells you
What
that,
happened?
hey, some guy asked her to dance,
Yep.
and she said, no, thank you. And then he made, what was the comment he made to her?
I'll simplify just saying I don't dance with women like you.
Right.
I'm not going to go
Right.
any
He said,
deeper than
I
that.
I don't dance with, and it was a derogatory term. And he goes, I don't dance with those anyway.
Right.
Okay. And you find out he said this.
I find that out.
And what do?
I went and approached him and asked him what the problem was. And he told me that I've been drinking a lot. I apologize. I'm sorry. And he said, let me apologize to your wife. So he came and joined us at the booth. And we spent probably a couple hours sitting talking to this man. He apologized. There was no problem.
Because he had been drinking heavily as well.
Yes, sir.
Or he had been drinking.
He'd been drinking.
And he basically came to you and said, hey, look, I'm really sorry. Or he said to you, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I said something I shouldn't have said.
Yeah, he apologized to me, and there was no problem. And we sat and talked quite a while after that. There was no problem. There was nothing, But at the end of the evening, when it was time to leave, it was, last call, like 1:45, whatever it was,
Right.
after a long time. We departed, went outside.
Wait a minute. So it's 1:45 in the morning, and the bar is closing.
Yes, sir.
So now you're all but wait, let me back up a second, because you also had a conversation, because you had found out that this man who apologized to you was also an off-duty police officer, correct?
That's correct.
Correct. And you struck up a conversation with him about the growing problem of marijuana use among children, correct?
Correct. Yes.
Right. So you guys kind of hit it off, and you were picking his brain, but so you didn't. That's when you realized that he was an off-duty police officer.
Correct.
The bar is closing. You're walking to your cars.
Well, we talked quite a while about that issue,
Right.
long before we left. My children were going to an elementary school in Winter Haven. I had found out from people that there was marijuana. Of course, back in that time, marijuana was this terrible, serious drug. The other stuff hadn't come in yet.
Right.
And I asked him questions about it, and he basically reaffirmed what I had talked about, because he was an officer. We exchanged some information. He gave me some information. I
Okay.
wanted to try to figure out how to do something about that problem in town.
But now the bar is closing,
Bar's closing.
and you're in the parking lot, and you walk to your cars.
Yes.
What happens?
We got to his car. He sat down in it, in his vehicle, and John Andrecki walked up.
John, your friend John.
John Andrecki walked up, pulled out a pistol, and shot him twice.
He shot him once in the head.
Once in the head and once in the back.
He fell forward, and he shot him in the back.
Yeah.
And I mean, you had no idea that John even had a gun, correct?
I did not. No.
And now, apparently, after the facts, John, there's no excuse for what he did, but for some reason, he thought that you guys had not settled the matter, and he was somehow defending your wife?
We never know. We don't know. But the only thing we can piece together is that for whatever reason, in his drunkenness or whatever, that he still thought that my wife had been. We don't know. We haven't been able to piece that together.
So he just out of nowhere pulls out a gun and shoots this man
and kills him
in the head and the back and kills him.
Yeah.
And you're just dumbfounded. You're there. You saw it happen. You just couldn't believe it.
Yeah. Well, it was it's pretty rough to see something like that, and we were drunk.
So exactly. So what happens next? As you said, you guys were very drunk.
Yeah.
So what happens now?
We went, and this just shows how drunk we were. We went and got in my car and left the scene, left the elbow room.
You fled the scene.
Absolutely.
Were there witnesses there at the time that happened?
Yeah, there were witnesses in the parking lot. There were other people leaving the bar. We were so drunk, we didn't. It's just you do stupid stuff when you act stupid. And we just left the scene. My wife was with me. I left my wife
In the
at the
parking
bar,
lot.
in the parking lot.
In the parking lot.
Yeah.
Now it turns out, apparently, after the fact investigations, John apparently had somebody take his gun out of the bar, hide it, and then bring it back to him at some point. Do you know why he did that?
He had a friend of his that was there with him, and when he found out that this gentleman was an officer, he had a pistol in his pocket, John did. He gave this pistol to that man. He went out and hid it outside somewhere. Then, and I got all this from the court testimony and everything, I didn't know about it. But after that, when he was getting ready to leave, he told this man, go out and get my gun. So the man went outside, got his pistol, brought it back in, and gave it to John. Now, whether at that time he was contemplating shooting him or it was just closing time, go get my gun, I don't know. There's variables there. I don't know.
So you guys are drunk. You flee the scene. You drive John home.
Yes.
What happened? You get arrested on the road?
I dropped him off. I was going home, and the police, of course, pulled me over and arrested me at that time. Had flashing red lights behind me. They pulled me over, and I was arrested.
And you said it was a non-violent occurrence. It was like a lot of the police officers knew you. They just pulled you over and arrested you.
Yeah, they arrested me and took me to jail.
So what happened at the police station?
We spent that night in the Winter Haven jail.
Was John already there?
Yeah,
they had gone to his house and picked him up.
Yeah, we were arrested separately. The next day, we were transferred to Polk County Jail down in Bartow. That morning of the following day, I was bonded out.
What's the difference between bond and bail?
The same thing.
Same thing?
Yeah, same thing, just terminology.
But now John was charged with first-degree murder?
John was charged with first-degree murder.
So he couldn't bond out.
So there was no bond for him.
But you weren't charged with murder. You were charged with what?
Accessory after the fact.
So you bond out accessory. They were basically charging you because you drove him home.
Yeah, I left the scene of the crime with them. So I was charged with accessory after the fact. My parents bonded me out the next morning, and I'm home.
You're playing golf with your family. You're having dinner. You're just like, you can't believe. What were you thinking? Like, oh my God, what just happened?
Yeah, I don't even know what I was thinking. I was terribly hungover when I got out of there. We had been drinking a lot.
Yeah.
It was like a horror story taking place. I remember my brothers were there. They said, let's just try to get me out of the house, get me away. Said, let's go play some golf. We went out. I was like a zombie trying to I didn't know. It was just traumatic.
So now a couple days later, you get a phone call from some friend of yours named Stu.
Stu, yes.
Tell me what Stu says to you.
Stu said that he was concerned. Now, Stu has passed away. Stu said that he was concerned for John being in jail and for the crime that he was facing, and he wanted to try to find some way to help him. And his plan that I found out later, ways to help him, was to bribe the witness to the crime, which would be Whitman.
Well, wait. Now, when you say Whitman,
he's the
when
guy
I said that John got somebody to take the gun outside and bring it back, that was Whitman.
Yes, sir.
So now he becomes the state witness, and they've given him total immunity at this point, correct?
Total immunity.
So he's going to testify against John that he said to bring the gun in and out and out and in.
And witnessed the shooting.
And
he was in the parking lot.
Oh, he was there. He witnessed the shooting. So he's got total immunity.
Yes.
So now Stu tells him, there's a contract on your life. If you testify, we got to get you out of town.
Right.
And where did that come from? I mean, it's craziness.
I think that was Stu's plan to try to help John in jail on the murder charge. Get rid of the witness who was going to testify and scare him and make him leave town. Well, that didn't work at all. Because, of course, the police found out about it in no time.
And how did the police find out about it?
That I don't know.
But wasn't there somebody else with Stu that was kind of working with the police?
Yeah, there was.
Okay, so the police knew that Stu had contacted their witness, their star witness, and was trying to drive him out of town.
Yeah.
So Stu Einstein, excuse me, I know you said he was trying to help.
Yep.
He's driving this witness to the airport, and the police pull them over.
Pulled them over.
And what happened?
Well, they arrested. They took Whitman, just took him from the thing. They arrested the gentleman Stu, who was driving him to the airport to fly to Chicago, and charged him with obstruction of justice, I believe was his charge.
They charged Stu with that?
Yes.
Let me interrupt you for a second. A lot of the men who come on this show were juveniles when they went to prison. And I always ask them, what are the common denominators of juveniles who end up in prison? And frequently, two of the things, the common denominators are alcohol abuse and hanging around the wrong group of people.
Yep.
And I look at you as a 31-year-old guy who's alcohol abuse and you're hanging around the wrong people.
Age doesn't change stupidity.
There you go. It's the same common denominators.
It's the common denominator, yeah.
So now this witness who saw everything, he's going to do whatever the police want him to do.
Correct.
And the grand jury has just now revoked your bond.
Correct.
And they've charged you with
first-degree murder.
Witness tampering.
And first-degree murder.
And obstruction of justice.
Yeah, and murder, yeah.
And first-degree murder.
Yep.
Wow. And an off-duty policeman, which just
Yeah.
which just accelerates it.
So suddenly I go from walking out to a guy's truck to I'm charged with murder, and they're actually talking about the death penalty. This is a death penalty case.
Death penalty's on the table.
Yeah. So yeah, and it was a terrible time. I mean, my life unraveled in a matter of hours. My life unraveled.
So now you're in jail. There's no bond.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like for a guy that's never been to jail before?
Well,
really?
I did. Yeah, now I'm without bond. Absolutely.
Yeah, now there's no bond. You're in
Right.
jail facing first-degree murder.
Yep.
What was that like in jail?
You know what? It seems surreal, but I never had any problems in jail. I never had. You would ask me that. Was I ever sort of threatened by officers or this given a hard
Well,
time?
a police
Never.
officer's killed. I'm assuming the guards are coming around giving you a hard time.
They never once, because they're a community of officers.
Right.
They know what's going on. I'd had officers actually come by my cell there and say, "How did you get involved in this? What happened?" Because they know what's going on. They hear. And it was one of their, officers that was killed, so they knew what was going on. I never had any problem from officers there. I never had any trouble from officers there. I would have officers come by the cell and say, "Hey, you don't know me, but my sister used to work for you at such and such a store with Eckerd's, or my mother used to work for you," or
Right.
I was treated with respect there.
So you never had any violence, any problems in jail, really? You were
Never.
just waiting your time. How long were you in jail before the trial started?
Wow, I had that written down.
What doesn't matter? A couple of months?
Well, the crime, it was 3 months to the time the trial
Yeah, today
set.
would be probably at least a year and a half, at
Yeah.
least.
Well, it was 3 months.
3 months.
Yep.
You said the trial was a blur.
Yeah.
How so?
It was just surreal. It wasn't like it was real.
You're like, this can't be happening.
Yeah. People would get up and say things, and I'd say, that's not true. That's just a lie they made up. They just created stuff,
Did you ever think there may be a chance that you would be found not guilty? I mean, you didn't shoot the gentleman. You had really nothing to do with this murder. But you were. Here's the thing.
Yeah.
The problem was you were guilty by association with John. You left the scene. You guys were drunk.
Yep.
And you were there when it happened.
Yep.
Was those things just too much for you to overcome? You had good lawyers?
I had very good lawyers.
And were those the four things that they just couldn't overcome? What was the problem? You clearly didn't kill this man.
The prosecutor portrayed it that I had plotted the crime with John. John was the trigger man. I wanted him dead because he had insulted my wife, and that I got John to do it, and that John sort of did what I told him to do because I had control. They created this whole scenario that made me look like like a crime figure or something.
And I'm assuming, okay, small town Florida, off-duty police officer. Was there a media frenzy going on?
It was on the news every day. It was constant. The newspapers were full of it, and
how old were your sons at this point?
9 and 8.
This had to be very difficult on your sons.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Well, fortunately, God works in mysterious ways.
Yeah.
I'm an ordained minister now, but the school they went to, one of the teachers that was there was a very good friend of mine that I worked with at Eckerd Drugs. And she watched out for them, made sure they didn't have any problems. When I was younger, I boxed some.
Okay.
And I taught my children to box. I bought boxing
Did they
gloves.
get in fights over this?
Not really get in fights because both of them were together.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And it was, if you took on one, you're going to take on both of them. They weren't sissies. They were, active men and kids, And, they sometimes were made fun of, saying your dad's a jailbird and this and that, but nothing beyond
Kids
that.
can be cruel.
Yeah.
May 1977. Guilty verdict.
Yep. Yeah.
Talk about that.
I really didn't think I was going to be convicted of first degree.
You didn't?
No. I mean, because my point, is that I didn't do this.
Well, that's what we were saying.
Yeah, I
you
didn't.
didn't do it.
How can I be convicted of a crime I didn't do? Yeah, there was so much other stuff that was created to make me look guilty.
Right. You were there. You fled the scene.
Yeah, but to be convicted was a real shock.
Another level.
Absolute trauma.
What did you think when they make you stand up? I'm assuming, and the judge is saying, I sentence you to life in prison, 25 years mandatory. What was going through your mind? Do you remember?
I don't know. There were so many things going through my mind right now.
Did you consider suicide?
When I got back to my cell, one of the ways that I tried to figure out is that how I could end my life and not let it be known it was a suicide. How could I die without being so that the shame to my family and the trauma to my family and everything that had gone on would just be over, just be done with. And I couldn't figure it out.
So the next month, June of 1977, you actually go to prison.
Yes.
And you end up at Rayford Correctional Institution,
Correct.
They call the Rock.
Yes.
And you're there for 2 years, which happened to be at that time voted the most violent prison in the entire in the entire country.
In
correct?
the nation. Yeah. There was a newspaper article about the most violent prison in the country. So,
and your father arranged for you to have a direct transfer to Rayford rather than go to a reception center because they feared for your life, correct?
it was well known that if you went to North Florida Reception Center for the crime of committing a police officer, you were going to have problems. They had a guy there called East Wing Slim or whatever his name was that brutalized people and everything. So my dad knew somebody in the sheriff's department. He arranged for me to be transferred directly to UCI.
How did you survive? I mean, you're not I think you were a bodybuilder at one time, but you're not a guy who's, been a big fighter his whole life. How did you survive 2 years at the nation's most violent prison?
I never had any problems there either. Never. I think it's the way you carry yourself and the way you act. I treated people with respect. I talked to people. People think I'd strange. I'd walk by somebody and say, "Hey, good morning, how you doing?" And they'd look at me like, who is this guy? But
right. They're not used to that.
Yeah, I just acted as the person that I had been. I'm sober now. I'm back to being who I was.
All the guys that come on this show say that every guy gets challenged for unwanted homosexual activity when they go to prison. So how did you, keep that unwanted advances, away? Because you really said you were never attacked. And,
never.
And how were you able to not be attacked in that way when so many other people are?
I never had anybody even approach me. I never had anybody come and suggest. I just never had. I guess it was the way I carried myself. I just never had those problems. Never. And I have people say, "Well, you didn't have this." No, I didn't experience that.
But you said, as you said, when you talk to people, you always had good eye contact, and a lot of weaker people don't.
Yep.
And they tend to be victimized.
Yeah. Well, they can see fear. The predators that we would call them, they can see fear.
Right.
If you look somebody right in the eye, they're going to say, "I ain't going to mess with this guy." If you duck your head and you look at the ground and you're sort of cowering down and say, "I got a mark here."
And so many men come on this show and they talk about all their money-making operations. They were stealing food from the kitchen and selling it. A lot of drug operations. Everybody's making money. You said no, you never did. You were you called yourself a chain gang millionaire because your family sent you money, right?
That's what guys would call somebody in there if you had money all the time. And they say, that's an old terminology, chain gang millionaire. But I wasn't. But my family always provided for me well.
And then you went to Avon Park, which was a much nicer camp than Rayford.
Yep.
Now you were transferred frequently among prisons because you said it was for the good of the institution. And this is very interesting because you didn't back down to anybody.
No.
For the good of the institution, they would transfer you. What does that mean?
Well, I've never liked injustice, people being taken advantage of. And lots of times I would see somebody being taken advantage of by officers or staff. And And I'd just tell them, you don't need to put up with that, man. You don't. So I would file grievances on their behalf. I would go talk to the lieutenant. I'd talk to the captain. Whatever it took, I would go and try to get that problem resolved.
Well, as you said, I advocated for those who could not advocate for themselves.
Absolutely.
And you would witness rapes.
Absolutely.
And you would also witness guards who didn't do anything about it, and their attitude was, they deserve it.
Who cares?
Who cares?
Yep.
They got themselves in here.
Yeah.
So what would you then do?
I'd go report to guard.
To who?
To whoever their supervisor was. And if that didn't work, I'd report it to the next one up. If that didn't work, I'd write central office in Tallahassee and file a grievance with them of this is going on, that went on. I have no problem sitting down writing the Secretary of Department of Corrections a letter or the Parole Commission, whatever it might be, and tell them what was going on in the prisons, theft, corruption, whatever it was. I met a couple guys that were very good at filing lawsuits. That were very, very good. And we would work together and file lawsuits against DOC. I actually at one time had a couple cases go to the federal court, and they actually settled with us financially just to let it go.
Wow.
But the problems changed.
Right.
The problems changed.
From the point of view of the administration, they said, let's get rid of this guy. So they would transfer you out.
Yeah. I'd get a little bus therapy.
You bus therapy?
Yeah.
But you said something else very interesting. You said, Chris, you cannot imagine the filth that goes on in prison. Talk about that.
Well, I think we were talking about basically slavery.
Well, actually, I think what you had said was gay men are bought and sold in prison, and you said people don't talk about it and they don't know about it. But you said gay men, gay men are bought and sold. Talk about that.
Well, in prisons, the female partner that they would call whoever it might be, their punk they would call them, they were taken by intimidation and fear, and they were made to go out and earn money, support, whatever it might be for their master or whatever they turned, their daddy or whatever. And if somebody would come along, and I witnessed a couple of them that day. When I was standing in the yard one day, and a guy come up and he said, I really like your punk. I'd like to buy him. He said, I'll sell him to you for $20. Guy gave him $20, and he said, you go with him now. You do what sold someone right in front of me.
And the guy just did what he was told to do.
Out of fear. Yeah, fear. Fear is a big thing. If you're afraid, if you don't, that person will at least protect you to a little bit. If you're not, you're just out there in terror, and you'll just be raped whenever they want you. But people don't talk about that. That's literally slavery, selling people in there. And it's degrading. I can't imagine anything more degrading than something like that.
Because you stuck up for people all the time.
Yeah. We'd file grievances. We would do whatever it took to, and I know they got tired of me. There's a lot of prisons people just get tired of me.
So you go to prison in 1977. Let's talk a little bit about your transition, because you actually did 25 years. Mm-hmm. And an interesting thing is if they really felt that you had anything to do with the killing of this off-duty police officer, they would have never let you go.
No.
But the fact that they paroled you out after 25 years,
yep.
not 30, right? When you became eligible 3 months later, you were paroled.
Yes, sir. And
you said that they've actually, law schools and criminal justice schools actually talk about your case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Talk about that.
Well, when I met a guy who this was an inmate. Was an inmate and actually worked in classification. This was at UCI. Years later, I met him at Avon Park, and he came up to me and he said, I get to know you. He said, you know that our cases were actually used in training sessions for DOC for new people came in. I said, what do you mean? And he said, they actually looked at your case and my case when new officers were hired and all that, showing how some things are done right and some things are done wrong.
What do you think? What do you think they realized they did wrong besides convicting you?
Well, I think they showed the way the system sometimes can be broken.
Right.
And that maybe not everybody there is what the courts say they are, what they were. But then years later, when I actually filed for release, we actually got and we're not supposed to have gotten, we actually got a report that was written by the Department of Corrections when I went to prison about the crime, how it happened. And it basically, this report to an extent, exonerated me from
Right.
the murder crime. And that's what a lot of the officers would see when they were trained. And it's one of the reasons I never had any problem with officers in prison.
Right.
I never had, even though I challenged them a lot and this and that, just didn't have the experiences a lot of guys have had.
Let's talk about your transition. You've been in for 25 years, right? You actually hired somebody named Annabelle Mitchell, who specialized in helping people with their
Yes.
with their parole process. But we'll
Yeah.
move past Annabelle Mitchell because she recommended you go to Everglades Correctional Institution because
Absolutely.
of Dr. Regina Sheeran's corrections transition
Absolutely.
program. And lo and behold, about the year 2000, you get transferred to Dr. Sheeran's program. What was your first impression of Dr. Sheeran?
An amazing lady who loved people.
As you said, who deserved a lot of respect,
Deserved-
demanded none, but
Deserved, just, you just everybody admired her there. Everybody just loved her. She she cared about people in a way that we haven't seen in a long time.
So you come up for parole, and at your first hearing, they said that they didn't want to. They were concerned about releasing you
In Florida.
in Florida because they feared that because it was an off-duty police officer got killed, the police would set you up and violate you.
That's correct.
So what did you have to do?
We applied for interstate compact through Annabelle Mitchell did.
That means parole in another state.
That are getting another state to accept me on parole.
Okay.
My brother lived in Virginia, so they were able to contact him, who lived there
In Harrisonburg?
in Harrisonburg, Virginia, and the pro area there, District 39 in Virginia, went out and interviewed my brother and his wife, saw where he lived, and I would be working for him when I got out, and that met all their requirements. So they had another hearing with just maybe like a month later, and released me on parole.
So you got out when you were about 58 years old.
58, yes, sir.
And you went to work for your brother. He owned some hotels up in Harrisonburg, which is
Yes,
a
sir.
lovely part of the state of Virginia.
Yep.
And you were a manager there?
No, I worked in maintenance.
You worked in maintenance?
Maintenance in the front desk.
And then you were there for 5 years, and then you retired.
Yeah, it was. I moved on. Yeah, it was just time
But
to
I
relax.
think you get bored. You like to work. You like to stay busy. So you retired from the hotel, but then you actually worked at the R&R printing company because you would learn printing schools in prison.
R&R Donnelly. Actually, when I was in Zephyr Hills, they had a print shop, and I learned the printing trade. So I went to work with R.R. Donnelly.
But
This was some years later, though. I went to R.R. Donnelly.
all right. So you're paroled to the state of Virginia, which is amazing.
Yep.
But talk now. In 2015, you went to work actually as a job for Strength and Peers, and
Yes.
you're a full-time employee. You're a state-certified peer recovery specialist.
Yes.
Talk. What is that?
I work with people that are homeless or coming out of prison or jail who have got substance abuse or co-occurring mental health problems. And I get to go to the jails and interview people, or to the prisons. And right now we can't because of the COVID. But we work with people coming out. I help them get a start in life. I help them look for work, get jobs. We help them, find some housing, get them clothing, get them whatever it helps to
It's
get
got
them
to be very
started.
fulfilling work.
It's the bbest thing I've ever done in my life.
That's what I tell people about my volunteerism at Everglades Correctional
Yeah.
Institution. It's so fulfilling, right?
It is, yeah. It's great. I'll be 77 next month, and I'd like to work till I'm 87.
And you
know.
actually help people, before the show, people who are suicidal.
Absolutely.
They call you and they come by your office and you help them?
Yeah. They just, the people that I'm working with, they'll say, I'm having a really tough day. I'm having trauma. I'm doing this, that. And I said, I just don't want to live anymore. I said, please come. Where are you at? And they'd say, well, I'm about 5 minutes from. I said, well, come. I had 2 last week coming in and talking about suicide, just didn't want to live anymore. But because they have mental health problems.
Right.
And they use drugs, and pretty soon it's just like my only hope is just to die,
And they
I've
come to
been
see
there.
you have a conversation with them, and
we have an organization we can send them to who's a PhD, and he can talk to them. We have counselors, we have professional counselors, we have contracts with. But a lot of times it's peer support. They come by. I basically do peer support.
Richard, unfortunately, we are out of time. I could talk to you for another hour easily. I hope that the next time you travel from Harrisonburg to Virginia, you come back, we do another episode, because we have a lot more to talk about.
Will do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, that does it for today, and thank you all so much for tuning in for another episode of Men Going Home. Special thanks to Owen and Deborah Edwards in Silver City, New Mexico, Kathy Duran right here in Miami, and Don Kassler in upstate New York. Thank you all so much for watching and letting us know you're enjoying the episodes. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you all here next week on Men Going Home.